Pro-life talk. Real-world answers. This is Life Report.
Welcome to Life Report. I am your host, Josh Brom. We're here with Liz Goddard and Gabi Veers. This is a topic that we've wanted to talk about for a while now, and it just kept on getting shelved, but I'm glad that we finally get to talk about it because I think this is important. There's been a debate going on in the pro-choice movement now for really a few decades, but especially the last several years about sex selection abortion. This is something that's in Steve Wagner's book, Common Ground Without Compromise. I almost called his book commonground.com. But that's not what it is.
That's where you can get
But that's where you can get it. commongroundbook.com. He's written about it. Pro-life people talk about this more. But there's this. I think we got to see this interesting window last year in the kind of the all of us know about the infighting that happens among pro-life people.
Yes.
We got to see a little window into kind of a similar debate that's being had in the pro-choice movement that I think is important for us to thoughtfully consider and determine how is it that we should be talking about this with the pro-choice people that we're talking to. So here's the story, and then we've got a couple of things to discuss about it. This pro-choice blogger named Laurie Penny wrote on her blog, she titled her blog post, "What value do you place on the life of a missing woman?" And then basically, I'm just going to read just a small section of what she wrote. She said, "All over the world, from Eastern Europe to India, millions of baby girls are missing." She said, "There is a gap in the census. It howls with the ghosts of girl children who died young or who never lived. Tens of millions of potential human beings neglected to death, murdered at birth, or, in increasing numbers, terminated when an ultrasound scan showed that a woman was due to come into the world." So here's a feminist thought exercise for you, she writes. "The Council of Europe has just passed a draft resolution whereby expectant mothers across the EU member states might be forbidden from knowing the gender of their unborn child. If the resolution is agreed and passed into law, doctors in the UK and 26 other countries would be strongly encouraged, if not strictly obliged, to refuse parents prior knowledge of whether their baby will be a boy or a girl. The stated purpose of this resolution is to prevent the selective abortion of female fetuses, which experts claim has become a trend in several of the former Soviet states." So she writes this blog post. And then she got savaged by other pro-choice bloggers who were really, really upset that she wrote this. I'm just going to give you a couple of examples. It's happened all over the place, but here's just a few of the more pronounced examples. Jill Stanek wrote about this on her blog, and she quoted feminist blogger Hannah Mudge, who was worried that this was going to play into anti-choice hands. She writes, "How can we encourage effective, productive debate on sex-selective abortion? What poses a problem here is the extent to which any discussion is obviously going to provide fuel for anti-choice fires. The way in which discussion on all this is likely to become unproductive was demonstrated perfectly by Laurie Penny, writing of missing girls and the howls of the ghosts of girl children. Several people commenting chose to attack Laurie for what they saw as her hypocrisy, writing that she can't have it both ways, and insinuating that her belief that abortion should be safe and legal is an enormous contradiction of her stance on sex-selective terminations. Obviously, this is untrue," she writes, "but I know it made a lot of people wonder how, as feminists, we can move forward in discussing the issue without falling into the trap of using phrases that wouldn't be out of place in anti-choice literature and playing into the hands of those who are quick to call hypocrisy." Then there was this pro-choice feminist writer Sophie Buckland, who she sent like a bunch of tweets. She read this thing and just like angry tweets, and just here's a few of them. She says, "If fetuses aborted due to their sex have ghosts that howl, surely all fetuses do. Pro-choice fail." She also tweeted, headline, "What value do you place on the life of a missing woman?" That was the title of that post. She writes, "That could easily be a pro-life one. Value of life, of fetuses. Full stop." And then she tweets, "The last thing we want to do is hand tools to the right wing or anti-choice to beat us with our own perceived hypocrisies," which this does. Okay. Discussing question number 1. Is there an inherent inconsistency in Laurie's article, or can you be both pro-choice and against sex selection abortion?
I think we should clarify her position a little bit more.
Yeah.
And this was something I noticed in some of the pro-choice responses to her post. In her post, she does not say that the answer is to make sex-selective abortions illegal.
That's right.
She is very clear and says that the reason people are having sex-selective abortion is because of how we treat living women.
This is cultural thing.
And that's a position I agree with. Yep. It's because of the way we treat living women. If you devalue a born woman, you're not going to value the unborn woman. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that.
I'm glad for that clarification, because then there was this debate on like, well, someone asked her what she thought about the in the United States. We were debating these bans on sex-selective abortions, and she was opposed to those bans. She was more for, let's do educational campaigns that is already going on in India, at least, where they're trying to help kind of move the culture to having this kind of equal view of men and women, which they haven't, which is why you have so many sex-selective abortions. So that's her view. So she didn't say it should be illegal, but so I guess I'll adjust my question a little bit. Let's take it outside of Laurie's post. Is there an inherent inconsistency when a pro-choice person says, I'm pro-choice, but I'm against sex selection abortions, or is it possible to be both pro-choice and against sex selection abortions?
It's tough when you use the term pro-choice because
like, what does that mean?
What it's getting at, and I think that the choice to have an abortion, believing that the fetus is not a valuable human being that needs protection, I think that you can have the belief that abortion is justifiable and that it's okay, that you're killing, that you're not killing people, that you're killing unvaluable objects. I think that view is reconcilable to the fact that you can also say don't do it on the basis of sex, because that's showing, okay, we believe that that there should be, a harmony between the amount of boy and girl potential people that we allow to come to birth. But the difficulty is that if you're going to call yourself pro-choice, then that puts you in a position of now judging what choices are right and wrong.
Right.
Because if you're going to call yourself pro-choice and believe that every woman has the right to make her own decision, then you can't take a stance against sex selection abortion, because you're saying that woman's choice to have a boy doesn't outweigh the value of that potential girl.
Let me ask you a quick question about that before you jump in, Gabi. Let me just because I think some pro-choice people do say exactly what you're saying. It seems like there's this sexism, and that's what we're concerned with. So here's one of the things that Steve Wagner wrote in his book. He said, well, if the pro-choice concern is simply about anything that smacks of sexism, then the solution would be to kill less female babies or more male babies. The question could be asked, why is it a problem to discriminate based on sex if we're discriminating against fetuses? So I wonder what the response to that would be. Because it seems like generally if we're against this, it's probably because of something more than just it smacks of sexism. But I'm not sure. What do you think, Gabi?
Well, I think in her article, what some of the pro-choice bloggers were picking up on was more her rhetoric than anything else.
Yes.
They were frustrated with the rhetoric and thought that was a perceived hypocrisy. I think for most pro-choice people that we're referring to here, they're saying sex-selective abortion is wrong because it's indicative of a larger problem. And I was talking with a pro-choice friend about this, and their comment was that, well, the reason why you have an abortion does matter. And it matters because of your motives behind it, not because of I'm not sure if this is specifically what their position was, but not just because of the worth and value of the fetus, but because of the other reasons you're doing it. Just like, I know we've used the example, if you go to a battlefield and you're a surgeon and you've got two people you can save, and you have to do triage, and you pick the person you can save. But the wrong decision would be to go see two people who are equally wounded and pick the white guy instead of the black guy. That would be the wrong decision. It's not wrong to leave one because you can only save one. And I know that's not a parallel to our discussion of abortion, but I think that's kind of how they view that. So I don't know if it's necessarily a hypocrisy.
And you could also go about it. Let me hear your response to that, because
Okay.
I've got even another way that pro-choice people could make their claim that I think works too.
I think something that would help clarify a little bit to bring this away from the issue of whether or not the unborn is a valuable human being, because that's not what we're debating right now. Right. We're debating from the pro-choice perspective. Right. It's kind of like looking at, suppose we have a world where instead of, conceiving in the normal way, everybody goes to be inseminated. Everybody goes to, the baby shop and picks the embryo that they want implanted in them. And so this idea that they're talking about is, would it be okay for women to go and all choose to have boys, and would that cause a problem? And should we be concerned if women are going to the embryo shop and they're only deciding to give life to boys instead of girls? And so people will say, yes, that's wrong. That shows an imbalance that's here in the world. We should be concerned about that. They're not saying that all of those embryos are valuable human beings and that we're killing, and that's, I think, where, again, we're talking about the rhetoric she used was inflammatory to her own side. But we're talking about, here's some potential humans, and if you're only choosing to give life to boy potential humans, then it's
indicative of a larger problem.
Yeah, it's indicative of a larger problem. You're creating an imbalance that shows sexism.
Could they then take that as far as saying that it should be illegal? I mean, I wonder, I think you could, obviously they could say, well, it's not smart. It's really smart if we have it generally balanced between male and female for lots of sociological reasons. But could they say that it's actually morally wrong to only pick the boy embryos, or mostly pick the boy embryos?
I think we have to make a distinction between what you just said, between what's morally wrong and whether or not it should be made illegal. I think you can say that it is wrong to make a preference based upon gender because of the other reasons, but we shouldn't restrict it if you believe you're pro-choice, because then, like they pointed out in some of the articles, well, then doesn't that mean that if you think it's wrong to abort a Down syndrome baby, don't you need to make it illegal to do that? And then if you really are genuinely pro-choice, you begin infringing and restricting what abortions are allowed.
Because a lot of pro-choice people believe that being pro-choice is not judging any choices. Now, that's not, I don't think where most pro-choice people are. Related to abortion, yeah, that's what I mean. So it becomes, but then that's not where most pro-choice people are at, though. Most pro-choice people I talk to do think that sex selection abortion is really, really wrong, and probably ought to be illegal as in late-term abortion too, but then maybe not the first trimester abortions or the ones because the girl's too poor or whatever. And so it seems like there's this conflict between what the kind of the top pro-choice thinkers or the advocates or the lobbyists are saying, and then what the consensus is of most. I mean, I've talked to a lot of pro-choice people, and you guys have too. I don't meet a lot of pro-choice people that will bite the sex selection abortion bullet. And why is that?
Well, it's hard to look at this issue strictly to try to interpret whether or not it's a logical position to hold.
Sure.
In a way, I think it's logical if you accept the right parameters and say, this is the only reason, it's indicative of a bigger problem. We're not assigning any value to these girls before they exist, but we think there needs to be some equality among how these children are allowed to become human. But the whole thing stinks. It really does. You cannot take any action upon your belief that sex selection abortion is wrong without trying to tell women what choices to make. And if you have the right to go into another culture and educate them, which is code for try to change their opinion, try to change their choice, and go in and try to educate these people into making a choice that you believe is better than the choice that they believe. And that all is indicative of pushing your moral preference on someone else. And so we're talking about these people are speaking in terms of relativism, but you can't act upon the belief that sex selection abortion is a bad idea without actually putting yourself between women and their choice.
I don't think that's an accurate representation of what they believe. I think that it's not. Some people, it's genuinely because they're relativists. And I think for those who really are diehard relatives, they would say, well, then, there's no way I could go to another culture and say that it's wrong for you to have get an abortion because you have a girl, just because she's a girl.
Right.
But I think other people are saying this is a wrong decision because people are not valuing women. Right. And she even mentions in her article, it's because they're being neglected to death. They don't have the education. They're not being valued at the same level as men are. So they're saying we should change that. It just should not be the government who comes in and makes a restriction on that choice. I think that's different than relativism.
I agree, that's
it's
different.
very different.
Yeah, I agree. So I think I'm going to ask the pro-choice person who's opposed to it. It seems more problematic if they don't believe the unborn's fully human. I think that's where this is most problematic. Steve wrote in his book, calling female feticide a crime against humanity makes sense only if the unborn's a human being. If the unborn's not a human being, how can we call killing her a crime against humanity? It may be a crime against potential humanity, but how can one commit a crime against humanity if we're not dealing with a bona fide human? And then he quoted this person from 1990s who wrote in the Atlantic Monthly, Martha Bales. He said, "It's a measure of feminist fanaticism that only recently have pro-choice activists announced their unwillingness to defend abortion as a method of sex selection. Perhaps it occurred to them that sex preferential practices have historically favored the male, and if this was their reasoning, then it's time to stand back and watch feminism collide with itself." But, which is an interesting quote, but then Trent Horn, I had Trent on recently, and we did an episode called Violinist Reasoning, where he explained how if someone was coming from the bodily rights perspective, if they concede that the unborn's a full human, then they could make sense of this, because they could say, well, the person has the right to unhook from the violinist, but not if it's just because the violinist is a female. Like, that seems wrong if they're making this decision purely based on the gender of the violinist. And so that might be a way that someone could make sense of it. Here's the next discussion question I've got for us. Should the other pro-choice bloggers have responded in a different way to someone like Laurie Penny that writes something that seems like the rhetoric is going against what the kind of the overall message of the movement is?
Well, this is a small sample size that we talked about as far as the pro-choice bloggers. I think whenever you're talking about an issue like this, you want to be supportive of your own side, but also apply some rigorous self-critique. So I think it's helpful that they pointed out and said, hey, look, you have inconsistent rhetoric. That's great. Right. And that's a criticism that, anyone should be receptive to. But I think at the same time, there was not as much... And I don't know, because just from what I read, not looking at the other pro-choice bloggers, it seems to me that there wasn't as much serious consideration of the issue that sex-selective abortion is a really serious issue, and let's confront it together. Right. And you've said something. I don't think everything you said is helpful, but hey, they could have found common ground. I agree with you. It's indicative of a larger problem.
Right. And then have this. I think taking this apparent inconsistency seriously and then writing about that as opposed to this kind of visceral reaction against her. How dare you use language that pro-life people might be able to pick up on? That's what I'm thinking. It's not. Who cares? Who is most helpful for? Is what she's writing true? Is there any truth to these concerns? Seems like that ought to be more of the debate.
I disagree. Okay. I think it's perfectly justifiable for a pro-choice person to read that and go, look, you're giving tools to the enemy. It's like when we look at someone who's made a pro-life argument that says, abortion is wrong because you could have killed the person who cures cancer. And we go, hey, don't do that, because it's really easy for the other side to go, you could have killed the person who was going to become the next Hitler. Yeah,
but see, here's the iron. Oh, sorry, go. You finish, and then I'm going to respond.
It's okay to get upset about that. But unfortunately, these conversations went the way of almost every blog type conversation in a public forum. People get nasty. People make ad hominem attacks. People attack the person and selected things instead of the whole of what was said. It was pretty typical in that regard. And I think that everybody can improve when it comes to having online discussions. People tend to let things slide. But I think it's perfectly okay to point out that, look, what you said really is going to react badly with the other side. The other side's going to jump on that and use it against you.
Sure. So but I think the irony of the thing, going back to when the pro-life people say you could have killed the cure of cancer or whatever. Irony is that, probably as far as I know, nobody talks more often about things that pro-life people should not say than our show.
Sure.
And I've received flack for that from people who feel like, and I've been told, I had someone posted on our YouTube channel, a public comment said, is like, how dare you're giving ammo to the pro-choice movement, basically, because they're going to pick up on what they should say to these lame pro-life arguments, so don't talk about them anymore. And
you're either doing that or you're making the pro-life movement stronger. It is okay. This is something that it infiltrates politics. You have these people who can't say anything wrong about the Republican Party or anything wrong about the Democratic Party or a particular candidate because they feel to be on that side means you have to hold that banner and stand by every single thing and justify every single stupid thing that comes out of the mouth of your politician. And that's dumb. It's like,
yeah, and I think it goes back to what are you really seeking here? Are you seeking group identity or are you seeking the pursuit of truth?
Yeah, and that's where I feel like when I read the responses that I've read so far from the people that responded to Laurie's post, I can obviously see how some of ghosts of children, I can see them freaking out about that.
Right.
But that's the whole of her piece. I think she's asking a question. She basically called it a thought experiment. She's like, hey, here's something to riddle me this. What do we do as feminists about the fact that there's millions of girls being aborted around the world just because of their gender? And then she offered some ideas of what she thought would be good to do. So she even kind of offered this kind of response to her own question, and then people jumped on her. I mean, they were vicious to her in a way that I don't think anyone's been that vicious to me, but certainly I've felt the negative, like, how dare you go again outside the whatever.
Sure.
And so I guess I feel like that's where I'm at. Is I feel like if we're in a pursuit for truth, like if I'm a pro-choice blogger, if I'm actually pro-choice, I'm going to want to try to figure this out. I might not try to figure it out publicly, like my process publicly. I mean, we've spent a lot of time on bodily rights arguments in the last year or two, and we've talked about some good arguments, and then we've tried out some ones that we were able to figure out based on reflection. Oh, wait, that might be liable for that. There might be a problem with that one because they might say this and this and this. And so we have this process but it's not just this process of we want to come up with the best smackdown argument and we want to come with some ad hoc that will totally work for whatever. No. We're trying to find truth, which has been really difficult with some of these issues that we're talking about. That it's not as concrete as some of the other things that we've usually talked about. And I feel like that should be so that's why I kind of react a little bit like, I guess
you were placing yourself in her shoes.
A little bit,
right.
A little bit, and
right.
I'm like,
There's never a justification for either side to dehumanize the person they're talking to, and particularly the pro-life side, that their whole deal is that everybody's human and everybody's valuable, and so that even puts a higher burden, I think, on us to treat other pro-lifers and pro-choicers with respect and dignity. And that's something that, wasn't upheld. It's okay to critique the argument and say, look, what you said is going to be a tool for the other side. But when you start dehumanizing the individual and ridiculing them, that becomes a problem. And that happens on both sides. It happens a lot in our culture. And it's really sad because it shows how we treat people we disagree with, and it's cruel.
Talk to me just for a few minutes. I've got something I can close with, but we've got a little bit more time. So before I start wrapping up the show, Gabi, let me get you to talk a little bit more about something that you said that I think would be this would be hard to do. We can't really get really in depth into this. It's going to be one of those over broad strokes things. But we're talking about pursuit of truth. I don't feel like everyone I meet or see on Facebook from either side of this is always like that's where they're coming from. A lot of times it feels like we're really, really confident in every single one of the tens of thousands of views that we have. And so we're all about just preaching that message and making fun of people that disagree. What do you mean when you say that we should be after a pursuit of truth, and how would you respond to someone that kind of disagrees, that is not coming from that, like, imagine the person who's not like attacking you, but they're just like kind of incredulous, like, hey, I'm a Christian, obviously I'm right, so why should I have this pursuit of truth thing? Some people are there. What would you say to them?
Well, I think there's a couple different positions. That would be one of them. I don't think anybody comes right out and says, yeah, I don't want to pursue truth. I just want to cling to my false beliefs as much as possible.
Right.
I don't think anybody believes that. So to that person, I would just question them and say, have you ever changed your mind about something? Have you ever studied something really thoroughly and then realized, hey, I'm going to modify my position based upon what I've learned? I know I have.
Right.
just, in the pro-life movement, within even my own Christian beliefs, as I've studied a doctrine out, I've changed my mind. And if I was wrong before, there's probably other things I'm wrong about.
Right.
And I think when it comes to the pursuit of truth, we need to keep something in mind. First of all, we can't be afraid of seeking truth. I was just on Facebook and someone was talking about how doctrine divides. And things like that. And, that's a religious discussion. But we can't be afraid of saying, okay, on the issue of abortion, someone's right and someone's wrong.
Right.
And we may have a mix of beliefs. We can't be afraid of saying that. We can't do a whole lovey-dovey, let's just get back to simple truth. Because even on those simple core things, people disagree.
Right.
And then I think the second thing is walk in humility. Have some personal character and realize if you've been wrong in the past, and if you've never changed your mind on something, you need to read more.
No,
that would not be a very kind thing to say. But
we're trying to avoid that, Liz.
I know.
Way to be an ambassador.
Yeah.
But you probably should change your mind about some things if you haven't changed your mind.
Yes.
I mean, unless you're
does.
Jesus, I mean, you're probably got some wrong views. I think I'm pretty confident that everybody does. I know I do. I've been married for 6 years. I know.
Yeah, if
this is not a
think
question.
everything you believe is right, then you're probably unmarried.
You're probably
single.
Okay, I'm glad you said that, and I've got a lot of things I could say about that, but we don't have time for that. So one day we will go there. How can pro-life people? Let's now talk to pro-life people specifically. This show is about creating dialogue. So how can pro-life people use this story to create dialogue with pro-choice people about abortion?
Well, definitely, it's a good place, and we've talked before about using this question as common ground. And the way you do that is to ask someone, one, do you believe that sex selection abortion is something that should be okay? It should be legal. We should allow it to continue. And you'll find, of course, the majority of people disagree with that. And the next step would be to dig a little bit. Why is it we should value these girls who aren't being born? And if those girls do have value, if they agree that those girls have value, why? And you're digging back to find that core reason that there's value to human beings. And that's going to extend not just to girls or to boys. It's going to move through the human race.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, just start asking questions. Say, hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about how her own side responded to her? Do you agree with that? Yeah. And just a couple questions and you've got a dialogue started.
Yeah, and it's easy when you're using kind of contemporary stories. This is a little, I mean, this is, a year ago now. So, it's not super, like this happened last week. It's not like that. But it's still within, it's had something that happened somewhat recently. And it's a debate. This is a narrow window again. And it's a debate that's been happening since around 1990. And it's going on especially now because of the state bans on sex selection abortions. This is a really good topic to talk about with pro-choice people. What is it that you think about this, and why would it be wrong to kill baby girls specifically if they're unborn? Do you think they're girls? Do you think they're humans? Or else, why does it matter?
Yeah.
That's our show. Have a great week. Thanks for watching.
You've been watching Life Report, pro-life talk, real world answers. Life Report is produced by Right to Life of Central California. Visit their website at fresnoprolife.org.